It didn't go well. If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn it to Romans chapter 13. This is where we're going to spend our time. I'm going to call it what I think it is, a failure in the Christian church. And it may just be something in humans that we all tend toward. We look at people, and I know nobody looks at me that way, for which I'm thankful. But we look at people in my position, let's just say, or we look at somebody who's an elder, or we look at somebody on TV who's got a large ministry of some kind, or Billy Graham, you pick it. And we view them in some ways as being detached from us somehow in their behavior, in their devotion to the Lord, in their consistency of living as a believer. And that is just so false. So false. The way things really are is Christendom is nothing but a bunch of redeemed people. That's all it is. And the ground around the cross is completely level. There is no little hill that some stand on and others don't. And every Christian, I don't care who they are, if they say different, they're lying. Let me just be really blunt. Is struggling to do just what this text is going to tell us to do, and that is to put on Christ. In other words, that every aspect of who we are, what we do, where we go, what we decide, what we eat, what we buy, how we use our resources, how we treat other people, how we think, what we think about, everything is supposed to be subjected to the rulership of Jesus. And yet, that is the struggle. That is the struggle. And anybody who says they're not, they've lied to themselves. I'll just say it that way. Let's take a look at this text and see what it would teach us or get us to think about. And I'll begin reading in verse 8. Romans chapter 13, verse 8. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for the one who loves their neighbor has fulfilled the whole of the law. You know the commandments. Do not commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, don't covet. And if there is any other commandment, it is summed up in this: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the entire law. And do this because we know the time, that it is already the hour for us to awaken from our sleep. For our salvation is now nearer than when we became believers. The night has advanced toward the dawn. The day is near. So we must lay aside the works of darkness and put on the weapons of light. Let us live decently as in the daytime, not in carousing and drunkenness or sexual immorality or sensuality, not in discord or jealousy. Instead, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to arouse its desires. Now this text, at first glance, looks like a really practical text. And I would say it is practical. There's a lot here that one could think about in terms of practical living as a believer, and they could put these things into practice in a sense of practical use. No question about it, but it is more. This text is also one that is deeply, mystically, spiritually theological. Very deeply and very mystically, spiritually theological. Paul says, owe no one anything. Now, I have heard this text preached as against debt. That is not what it's talking about. Now, you could take it that way, I suppose, but that's not what he means at all. Think about it this way. Here's how I want to do this. I want to install in your minds several thoughts, all of them coming from the Scripture, including this one, owe no one anything. And I want us to stick them together and to see how this is that we then walk through this world as believers, and how then we shall live. What will it look like? What would it be like? What are we striving toward? Okay, owe no one anything. Well, the same apostle that said that said to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2, a soldier doesn't get entangled in civilian matters. What does he mean by that? Does he mean just for the military person, or is he talking about something else? Clearly, he's talking about something else. He's saying to Timothy, You, as a soldier for Christ, need to make sure that you don't entangle yourself with things that are going to take you away from the goal of being a good servant of the Lord. That makes sense to me. That's very different from reading it literally like, owe no one anything. Very different. He says in this very text, we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. Jesus said that there is a way that is very narrow, and few find it, the way of salvation. But there's a way that's very broad, the way of destruction, and many travel that path. All right, how are we going to love somebody and owe no one anything? I remember reading Mussolini, the great Il Duce, the great dictator of Italy during the fascist period in Italy. He said, make your heart a desert. Why did he say that? Because he's maybe thought about what Paul said here about not being entangled. If my heart's a desert, I'm not tangled up with anybody. And nothing deters me from that goal that I might see myself as trying to reach, or the mission that I see myself as on. But Paul says we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. I promise you, if you're going to love anybody, you're going to be entangled. There is no way. I remember distinctly, I can see myself sitting in that chair in the hospital room while Becky was sleeping. She did all the work. So she's sleeping, and I'm holding that little head in my hand the size of a grapefruit and looking at this little face. I guarantee you in that moment I became entangled, deeply entangled. So how is it that we're going to put these pieces together? Jesus talks about a narrow way. I'm just going to say, for all of us in this room and for every Christian in North America, the way looks really wide to me. I don't think it's narrow at all. I mean, you take a believer, plop them down into a neighborhood, any neighborhood, take a middle-class neighborhood and plop a believing family down in that neighborhood. Who in that neighborhood is going to know they're believers? 5 years later, who in that neighborhood is going to know they're believers? I think the path is very wide. I don't like this text. Let me just say that right straight out. I don't like it because this text challenges me in ways that I don't like to be challenged, period. God's grace is very wide. If it weren't so, I think you would see Christians looking very different from the rest of the world immediately upon being born again. But that's not how it is. God's grace is very wide, and so we're allowed this gigantic latitude because of God's grace once we're born again, wherein it is very hard to tell us apart from somebody who's not a believer. But there should be some things that happen in us, and I think there are. And one of these is what this text does for me, which I do not like. It forces me to ask questions of myself, about myself, that I really would rather not ask. The question it asks me to ask is, are there things to which I am attached or that are attached to me that because I like them, that maybe I shouldn't like so much? Are there? Seems to me that this wide way that God has given us in grace puts us in a position where we've got just a mountain of choices in front of us that we can decide how things are going to go. And one of them is, what does it mean when Paul says, owe no one anything and put on Christ? We get to pick. We get to decide what that's going to look like. This is where the fallen cosmos and being born again and the freedom that God gives to humanity all come together in one little place. And it makes the world look a lot different to me. You ever stand in a candy aisle with a small child and tell them you can pick out 3 pieces of candy? Now they're looking at a counter, it's 20 feet long. There must be 100 different pieces of candy. You know, they get to pick 3. It takes a long time for them to pick. I remember when Jackson was little, he loved Hot Wheels. So if there was something he had done wherein there was going to be a reward, Well, let's go to Walmart and look at the Hot Wheels. You can pick 2 Hot Wheels. There'd be 75 Hot Wheels hanging up there. They're all different. And he would stand there for a long time and become somewhat frustrated in his choosing. Why? Because he didn't want to pick one that might be lesser than the one he could have picked. Right? Don't want to make the bad decision and pick the wrong thing. Well, extrapolate that into modern Christian adulthood and tell me that we're not frustrated by much the same thing. All these choices about what we can do with life, make choices about our lives, all out in front of us, and yet we find ourselves kind of frustrated in them because there are so many of them, and we want to make sure we pick the best one so that we're not thinking, oh, if only I had done that instead of this. And we're no different than the kid in the candy aisle at all. There are things that we have chosen, that we are choosing, that we're living with right now as attachments, where we have chosen things that take us away from, they entangle us in things that we should be less entangled. Absolutely. That's why Paul's admonition to Timothy makes some sense. Do we find ourselves then owing somebody something because of that? Not in terms of being in debt for finances. Maybe that's part of it. I mean, that's a big deal. I've talked to people in the last 3 or 4 months in crisis in their life because they have spent money they really shouldn't have spent on things that have caused them now to be attached to something that is causing them great distress in their life and in their relationships because they've made these choices. They've attached themselves to something. Do we do that? Sure we do. And we do it in ways that don't have anything to do with finances at all. We believe lies. We take in ideas. We take in all kinds of things where we attach ourselves to things or allow ourselves to become attached to them that take us away from the ability to put on Christ. And there's a tension there. And some people get kind of angry about that tension. A lot of Christians live in a state of what I would call utter resentment toward God because God's asking things of them that they really would prefer. I mean, let's just be honest here for just a minute if we possibly can. Not with me, but with ourselves. We're sitting here this morning. Do yourself the big favor here and think of 5 different things that you could be doing that you would find more interesting than being here. They're easy to think of. Easy. It's easy to think of those things. I mean, think about this, for instance. Let me give you another example here of where I'm trying to go with this desperately. Think about the distinction between devotion and devotions. I know a lot of believers who do devotions. I remember when I traveled, the first band I traveled with, you were responsible. We did one every day when we were on the road. And each band member would rotate in responsibility for it. You had to come up with one. So you're always, it's good. It was a good discipline. But how many people do you know who you've seen who do lots of devotions, like they come to church, they attend Sunday school, they do all the things they're supposed to be doing. But then in their life, they look very different from what God would say is a devoted life. There's a big difference between devotion and devotions. Our main problem is we are very pleased by lots of things. I am. And a lot of those things come at great cost. You know, God gives us from birth to death. That's all you got. You can't save any of it. We can't spend it efficiently. It's just going away. It's going away while we're sitting here today. And so everything we do comes at a cost. It comes at the cost of that birth to death period of life that we have. That's all we've got. And so everything we do in the fallen cosmos in that birth to death life is going to be, no matter what we think of it, tainted. Everything. It's tainted us being here right now. Some people think, well, when you're praying, that's not tainted. Wrong-o. Wrong-o. Who in this room would say, oh, I never am distracted in prayer. My mind never drifts off to anything else. I am utterly devoted to prayer. When I'm praying, it's just me and God. I can't say that. I'm easily distracted. I'll think about something I forgot to do, and the next thing you know, I'm miles away from anything that I've been praying about. Everything is tainted, and there's no escape from it. But then on the other hand, Paul says, put on Christ, and then you've got this perspective that I think is a right one. The image of God in us, we're built to enjoy things, so it's not like this world should just be a bleak, gray place where nothing should please us ever. I think pleasure is a good thing. God has built us for it to a large degree. It's tainted, but it's still there. There's a reflection of God's image in being pleased by things. No doubt about it. I mean, after all, what is the restoration? God talks about the restoration in the scripture, and he tells us what it's going to be like. What's it like? Lions laying down with lambs, children playing at cobras' dens, milk and honey, a banquet table. Those all sound like pleasurable things to me. This is where this funnels down for me. And this is where I am so thankful to be a believer, is I don't have to figure any of this stuff out at all. Why? Because God's going to make sure I know. Going to make sure you know. You know, one of the beautiful things about aging, I never thought when I was younger that I would like aging. And there are lots of parts about it right now I still don't like. But there's one part about it as a Christian I really do like, and that is at various points in life, God uses pain to bring me to places that I would not go on my own, that are better for me. They're better for me. I wouldn't choose them. And he does it. There's a great analogy here. I don't know if you're aware of this or not. I know one person in the room is, because she sees it all the time in her reports. But you may not be aware of it. Your skin, our skin, is covered with nerve endings. We all know that. When somebody sticks us with a needle at the doctor's office, we're aware of the needle. If you put your hand on something hot, you're aware it's hot. If you step on something sharp, you're aware it's sharp. But there are two kinds of receptors. One receptor is the immediate one that's super sensitive to the tiniest perturbation, the tiniest little bit of change. The needle point touches you and you feel it immediately, or something just brushes across the hairs on your hand, you feel that. Those are certain kinds of nerve receptors. In the work that I do, I routinely get sawdust and debris in my shoes because I work in shorts. I like working in shorts. And so inevitably, I've got pairs of socks right now. I can put them on and I will immediately feel a splinter in the sock that's embedded in the fibers turn sideways and stick me in the foot. And I'll feel that little prick, tiny little perturbation right away. I'm perturbed by that right away. But you know, when I'm busy, I get splinters turning sideways in my socks all the time. And I'm busy and I'm too busy to worry about it and I ignore it. There's another set of nerve receptors that come along later and they hurt a lot worse. They're the ones that you go somewhere and you're doing something really fun that day and you're wearing shoes that don't fit just right and it hurts, but you don't pay any attention to it. The first nerve endings don't give you a strong enough message and you get home and you got a big old blister. And now your nerve endings are telling you right loudly, you cannot wear this shoe like this any longer for a little while. God is like that. He works like that. He might prick us and we might be so enmeshed in whatever we've entangled ourselves in that we don't hear him and we don't feel it. And so he'll let us go like that for a long time until finally he has to tenderize us via some other pain that comes along and says, this needs to be changed. And then we're able to listen. Then we're able to hear. I think all of us, I know I am, we look at things that we love, we're entangled by them. Some of them, we don't ever bother to ask the question, should I love this like I do? And it may be that God has to tenderize us if this is something that he would like to see changed and bring us to a place where it becomes a little more painful, that we might have been so much better off had we taken the first little prick and listened. But we didn't. But this is where I love all the things that come along with aging. Because the pains that come along with aging let me know that even though I might be too numb, I might be stupid, I might be ignorant of the fact that God is trying to change me, He's going to change me. He's just going to keep working. He's going to do it. And God may have to tenderize me, but He will do that work as well. I don't have to get it right. I don't have to go through my life agonizing over every little detail of living in order to do what Paul says here, which is put on Christ, owe no one anything. I don't have to do that. God will do it for me. I'll do the best I can. You will too. Sometimes pain is the best thing that can happen to us because it's the thing that God can use to bring us back. And I don't have to be monitoring all that to figure it out myself. God will take care of that for me. Not because He wants to hurt me, because He wants it to be the best for me and for you. I don't know where everybody is today.